Hello folks, my name is Chi Baker and I'm a licensed professional counselor for the state of Oregon. And this is the third video in a series focusing around grief. And this particular one is going to be focused a little bit more on the impact of sudden grief due to a recent tragedy that happened here in a community where two young children were shot and killed by their mother, and then their mother committed suicide. The first video that I talked about was the stages of grief and kind of recognizing the process of it, and also stating, the link will be in the description below. It's not really a stage, it's not linear. There's different maybe points of grief that some people will go through, some people will come back to, some people will skip. The second video is focused mostly for parents, helping children process their grief, but it really can be for anyone working through their grief, whether it's a child or an adult. And then again, this video is really kind of focused a lot on kind of the impact of a sudden death, tragic death. For those who don't know, as I stated, I'm a mental health counselor. I'm also a certified addictions counselor. I also am a clinical supervisor for people working towards licensure in the state. And I am a martial art instructor that runs a school here in Portland, Oregon for self-protection and healing. Perhaps the most important part of who I am is that I am the father of two children who have been directly impacted by the two recent tragedies of the Bridger Elementary School community. My fourth grade son was a student of Master Julia's, who passed a couple months ago due to a sudden death, medical death. And my youngest daughter, May, is in Master Brenda's class, and her classmate, Kalina, is one of the children who got shot and died this past week. And so my children are being directly affected. I'm being directly affected by these two deaths, and it's been a very difficult process, even for myself, who is a counselor, of trying to make sense of it, understanding it, and really struggling with the pain and the suffering of these children who were killed. So I'm definitely involved in the situation, and it hits close to home. And I apologize, this video may ramble a little bit. I'm trying to get it out as soon as possible, so I haven't really practiced or scripted that well. So please, apologies for it may zigzag a little bit. One thing I want to talk about is different categories of grief, and these categories may very well affect the time it takes to grieve, one's perspective on death, and one's sense of safety. And in particular, this one, where we're mainly working on focusing on the death of these two children and their mother. So one category is a long predicted death, and mostly what we're talking about is somebody who has a diagnosed known terminal illness, but they may have several years out. It may be an early stage of, let's say, cancer, and they may even go into remission. There may be a cure, but the possibility is that they're going to die of this illness, but it's something that is a fairly long period of time. Let's say something like 5 to 10 years. In this way, a person has the ability to kind of start to process the idea of death. The family, the friends will know about it. They will maybe start to grieve. There may be times for a lot of visits and kind of having conversations and storytelling and all the things that may be desired to take place before the person dies. And so there's kind of a preparedness that happens. The second one is a short-term predicted death. Again, this could be a terminal illness, maybe in the later stages, or it could be some sort of injury that the person has resolved, and it may be a shorter term, like maybe a couple days to a couple weeks to a couple months, that ultimately it is known that this person is going to pass away due to the injury or high potential of passing away. Again, what this does is offer a little bit of time to process, a little bit of time for people to visit and kind of prepare for the inevitable death. The third category is a sudden death, and I'm just going to categorize it as a sudden death. And this is something where it could be something like a car accident, it could be something like a natural disaster, it could be something of, in the case of Marissa Julia, an unknown medical complication, but it's something that happens, no one was aware of it, the circumstances, or no, it was not predicted, and that person dies suddenly. The fourth category is a violent sudden death, and kind of what we're looking at here is suicide, homicide, so that's what's surrounding this most recent case, but also things like war. So we know where Russia and Ukraine are at war, and it could also be something like an attack by an animal that caused a sudden death. So it could be attack here in Oregon, attack by a cougar, a shark attack, something where it was maybe considered violent, but also sudden. And the last category of the violent sudden death takes on a whole different set of difficulties, struggles, suffering, and a lot of it has to do with questioning humanity, questioning person, maybe questioning their family or their ethnicity, questioning one's own sense of safety, and just kind of may evoke a lot of fear versus something like dying of cancer due to smoking. That may not instill as much sense of impending doom, fear, that this might happen to you, this might happen to a loved one. So these types of deaths can kind of really hit the core, but also do some significant damage to the psyche and kind of one's own sense of safety, and really start to kind of, people may struggle with just how could this possibly happen. One of my daughters, who is 11, when she found out by looking up on the news what had happened, it just spun her really deep of how could a mother do this to her children. And we've talked a little about this, and in our family we're trying not to place blame or judgment, just really the sadness of what has transpired and grieving what a mother would be going through to come to the conclusion that this was the best suited for her children and herself. So trying to reach out with compassion versus judgment and shame. So that's kind of the categories. One piece here is talking about grieving, and grieving, what I try not to do is look at grieving in terms of right and wrong versus healthy and non-healthy. So right and wrong, again, you're creating more avenues for shame, judgment. It's harder to free a person if they're bad or doing something wrong, versus that is not the healthiest way, and that's something that is maybe easier to be resolved and is maybe less harmful and judging on a person. So in here, I kind of really emphasize, when people are talking about grieving and helping people through it, of really labeling it as let's look at healthy ways of grieving. And with that, what I want to put out there is healthy grieving is going to look different for everybody. And there's a couple pieces of that. We want to look at aspects of culture. So cultures have their own ways of grieving, their own processes of grieving, acts of grieving. Some of them have their own timelines of how long they're supposed to grieve. So there's culture, there's age, there's religion, there's spirituality. Some of it is based on economics, some of it is based on the health of the individual. And there may be many other extenuating circumstances on how one grieves. So again, it's good to understand those pieces, particularly as a clinician, not looking at your viewpoint, but maybe looking and understanding the viewpoint and the culture and the background of the person in front of you. And again, understanding them and then discussing, well, if that's in your culture, how does one work through the grieving process in your culture, and really kind of aim it that way of, if that's the tradition, are there traditions also that the grieving ends or the grieving period ends, and what does that look like, and what can you do from between now and then? So it is really looking at one's own orientation, and also with that looking around one orientation of life, what it means to be living, what it means to die or death, and as well as what is the afterlife. So some people, some cultures believe in afterlife, some people don't, and kind of looking at that of how that may influence one's grieving process, particularly again around something that's sudden violent, of what might that look like for that person now that they are gone, what might be transpiring now that they are gone. In terms of time frame's hard. Again, a lot of this is culturally specific. In my field, there's kind of a timeline that we look at what's healthy and what's not healthy. Right now, it's surrounding somewhere between 9 to 12 months, and then it starts to become something that's diagnosable. Instead of timeframes, what I would again really look at people towards is the functionality of the person. So again, right and wrong, healthy, non-healthy, really starting to look at the functionality of how that person is doing. The initial stage of assessing one's functionality is looking at how were they functioning before the death, before the news, before hearing about things. What was what we call their baseline. So their baseline in terms of emotionality, their baseline in terms of energy, activity, etc. So we're looking at what were they like before, and part of it is looking at, were they healthy before, and how are they doing now in comparison, right? So it can give you a gauge of looking at things. Obviously, if somebody wasn't healthy before, they may be more unhealthy now that is going on. So let's take the idea of nutrition. So maybe they were eating a lot of unnutritious food, maybe a lot of fast food, a lot of food filled with sugar and processed food, and now they're eating more sugar and more processed food, or maybe they're eating the same amount. So again, you're looking at comparisons of before and now, and were they healthy before, and how are they doing in comparison now? So major life areas, we're looking at work and school, right, depending on your situation and your age. We're looking at play/recreation, so things that you find pleasure in, things that you do for fun. We're looking at relationships and socialization, so the relationships that you are having with people. It could be schoolmates, it could be family members, it could be community members, it could be people that you are in a sports team, or if you go to church or some sort of spiritual community. Looking at those relationships, those connections, and looking at how you are maintaining those connections and how you are socializing in those situations. Okay. The next big ones are eating, right? So it's not just the type of food, but it's the amount of food. So a lot of times, usually it either goes up or way down. So people may consume a lot of food due to their pain and struggle and suffering, particularly foods that are unhealthy, like ice cream and sugars, or really fatty foods like French fries, which I've no judgment on those. I enjoy all those, but you're looking at how often are they eating them, and the amounts. Or people cut out food they haven't eaten for days, or they're eating very little, or they're kind of picking at their food, which is kind of the more common way, is that people, when they're grieving, they eat a lot less. But again, some people just dive bomb in and eat a lot of comfort food, which unfortunately is typically extremely unhealthy. Another major area is sleep. Some people, again, it goes in both ways. Some people, they sleep and they're in bed for days on end. They don't leave the bedroom, they're asleep. They use sleep as a way to avoiding the pain, to kind of escape. Or people just can't sleep. They're up, anxiety is really high, they can't fall asleep, or their sleep is really fitful. So looking at those factors. So those are some of the major things that I might look at when I'm assessing how somebody is doing, kind of, again, on that healthy, non-healthy kind of parameter. How are people doing, functioning in those areas? There may be other areas that people look at as well. And again, if you want to comment, you can leave comments on some of the other areas that you may look at. I don't claim to be an expert in this. I am a practitioner. I've been in this field for over 30 years, so I do have some experience. Trauma and working with grief is one of my subspecialties, so I do work quite a bit with people with this. Again, just on my mental health background, I work with individuals, I work with families, I work with couples, I work with kiddos, and I work with grandparents. So I kind of have a kind of big background and spectrum of people I work with. One thing that I also want to kind of talk about, again, in particular to the recent deaths of these two school children and their mother, is, and this is kind of something that, again, my oldest child, I think, was really kind of struggling with, is when deaths are sudden, and often when they're sudden, they're tragic. And when they're sudden, tragic, and violent, it kind of does a lot of havoc on the psyche, the nervous system, the body, so body, mind, spirit. And it can lead to a lot of questions, a lot of what ifs, a lot of how is this possible? How could this happen? And it can create a lot of fear and a lot of doubt, and it can get fear and doubt in oneself. It can create fear and doubt in one's immediate family, so siblings, parents, extending to classrooms, extending to teachers, extending further and further out. Could be fear of the town that one lives in, city, neighborhood. It could be the nation. It could be the world, right? So that can kind of really creep in. And I think it's good, particularly for facilitators who are trying to help people through the grieving process, of checking in with those. Like, so how are you feeling about your family, and how's your sense of safety? And do you feel that you're safe in these different environments? Do you feel safe at home? Do you feel safe at school? Do you feel safe walking around your neighborhood? Do you feel safe going downtown? Do you feel safe, right, in maybe some typical areas or possible areas that they might go? Do they feel safe? Who do they feel safe with? So maybe, who are the protectors of them? How are they connecting with those people? How often can they connect with those things? What activities do you do that help you feel safe? Let's try to create a safe environment. So in my office, right, I've got a nice couch. This is my therapy office. I've got, blankets. Oftentimes when I'm working with kids, I've got stuffed animals, and I've got, different things that they can maybe cuddle up with. I've actually had adults here who grab the teddy bear, grab the blanket, and wrap themselves in it. So people of all ages, that sense of comfort and safety is necessary. particularly when you feel like the world is out of control and you're spinning and the world's unsafe. So really looking at that place of safety. And again, and I don't want to go too far into this rabbit hole, but Portland is becoming increasingly what I would consider less safe and more violent. And so some of this, my 11-year-old said, why are there so many shootings? Why is this happening in our neighborhood? Why is this happening in my school? Why is this happening, right? So it's really starting to creep in on her where she's feeling unsafe. And I think those are valid concerns, valid questions of the safety. And it's saying, being truthful about it, of, let's look at these factors and let's talk about them. Let's flush them out, see if we can come with some answers or resolutions, or just help you really focus on when you're safe and creating a safe environment and being in those safe environments as much as you can. People sometimes who are religious or even non-religious will ask things like, how could God allow this to happen? How could God allow a mother to shoot her 2 kids? How could God allow a beautiful, wonderful teacher to suddenly die? So there can be those questions of, how could this happen? It doesn't make sense. I don't understand it. Unfortunately, some things you cannot understand and will never make sense. And that's the unfortunate part of things. And so what we do is we try to move it to areas of what do you understand and what can we make sense of? And what can you do? What do you have control over? So I think it's important to orient people towards, where is their safety? And let's also allow you to grieve and allow you to process and talk through these things. One thing that I really want to impress, and I'll try to remember to set the link below, is we're looking at age groups and when and what to say. And the biggest piece that I believe in, that some of these handouts are from the Dougy Center, what they point out to is, be truthful. Don't lie. They may hear something else that's the truth, and then you're in conflict of, well, why didn't you tell me the truth? And then they feel unsafe even more, and then they question things even more. So tell the truth. Now, how much of the truth you tell should be limited. So you might just give the bare bones. So in this case, I told my youngest that her classmate, we found out yesterday, had died. And she may hear about it at school that her classmate died. In fact, I'm sure that she did talk about it in that day. I didn't go into the details that, the mother shot her classmate with a gun and then turned the gun on herself and shot her. I left that part out, just simply that your classmate has died, and it's very sad, and kind of talked to how she felt about the news, etc. But I told her the truth. I didn't say that her classmate moved away or her classmate would no longer be in class with her and who knows why. Just, her classmate was dead, and she's 6. Now, my 9-year-old and my 10-year-old and my 11-year-old, we told them that this had happened, that these 2 kids who are in their school were shot and killed, because they will probably hear and know of that. So we want to tell the truth. The unfortunate thing about society and social media is news now spreads like wildfire. So a kid finds out and the kid is going to blast it, whether they're going to verbally blast it in school or on the playground or on the streets, maybe at the sports team that they go to, which happened in the case of my son. So the news will spread. So I think it's better to, instead of hiding and hoping they don't find out, of tell them, be proactive in telling them, and let them know from somebody who knows the facts, hopefully somebody they trust, hopefully someone who feels safe, and somebody who is professional enough and capable enough to explain it, to help them process it upon first hearing it, versus they hear it in the hallway from their friend who's shouting out about it, or they get a text about it, or they're scanning the internet and they find it on the website, or they hear a whisper of it in school. That is not the best way for anyone to find out about tragic news, particularly somebody they know. So we want to be forthcoming in telling people about this. Again, going back to the age of the person you are talking about, whether you're informing them for the first time or you're working with them on processing the grief, is you need to look at the age. With age, though, you need to look at the level of maturity. So we know people of different ages will be mature in different ways. Looking at their brain development, which goes along with age and maturity. You're also looking at the sophistication of understanding concrete and abstract topics. And you want to look at their capacity to hear the news and talk about it. So in our case, right, we've had a lot of overwhelming news, a lot of tragic news, a lot of difficulty. Kids' capacity, my capacity, is going down quickly. So the ability to cope, to deal, to hear, to understand, to discuss may be way low. So the capacity of somebody is important. Capacity also changes from moment to moment. Someday people have more capacity, some people have almost no or less capacity. So you've got to kind of ask when you check in, like, hey, do you have the time, the energy, the desire to talk about this right now? Don't just throw it on them. Say, like, let's talk about this if you're willing, if you want to. Let's, and again, the type of information, the amount of information should be gauged, monitored, and delivered based on things, again, age, maturity, sophistication, brain development, capacity, all those things. So you want to look at those of what is this person, what's reasonable, what's prudent at this point in time. So please really look out at that of how and when do I talk to this person, how much information, looking at their belief systems, looking at their cultural space and identity, really looking at different factors. Make this a mindful, very intentional, very thoughtful, planful discussion. Right? Don't just kind of blurt it out, throw it out, and hope it works out well. Let me check my notes one last time to see if I left anything major out. I think that's about it. Again, I really urge people to talk about this information. Don't hide this information. Even if you don't go to the school, communities intersect, right? So if it's a neighboring community, it might be good to disclose it because kids may hear about it in the news, and then they're like, what the heck? And you may not know that they know about it, and they may be struggling without your knowledge. So instead of hiding it or hoping that they don't find out about it, I think it's better to talk about it, to disclose it, kind of be preventative and proactive in it. It's also something where all this stuff, so grieving, struggling, healing is a process, and it takes quite a while. It also takes multiple times of conversations, multiple acts, multiple opportunities to work through it. So this is not a one and done issue. That talking about grieving, talking about perspectives, talking about fears and doubts needs to happen multiple times. So please be aware of that you should get back to your students, get back to your children, get back to your partners, get back to your community members multiple times. I gotta make sure, I gotta plug in my phone because it's about to die. So hopefully this video will be helpful for people to better understanding kind of grieving and some of the aspects around a sudden violent death and how it may be affecting your child, even just affecting yourself, and what you can do about it. Again, in the link below, I'll link the put the links to the 2 other videos that I think are helpful. If you watch this one first, I do encourage you to watch the other 2 so that you have more information to help you and the people you care about through this process. Please feel free to reach out to me. I have a website. I apologize for my website. It's not that great of a website. You can email me. My phone number is also on the website page. And please, reach out to different support systems that you have available to you. And hopefully we can heal through this together. And hopefully that these tragedies become less and less. And hopefully we can heal and can move into a thriving place as a community. All right, guys, blessings to all, and be safe out there.